I'm Brian Hyde. Today we're going to be talking about rewriting right and wrong. You see, every political intrigue, every conflict that you see going on around us, and frankly, there's a lot of it, still is based in the concept of something is right and something is wrong. Just because it's been politicized doesn't mean that the nature of right and wrong has changed. Just because the state says it's okay to do something, like own slaves or whatnot, doesn't mean it's the right or moral thing to do. Unfortunately, a lot of people, particularly on the political left, have forgotten this, and boy, are they on the warpath. Wait till you hear what they have planned for Idaho.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I strongly considered calling this episode Woe Unto Them. And that was, referring to the verse from Isaiah about woe unto them who would call good evil or darkness light or light for dark or bitter for sweet. We seem to live in a time of inverted reality where things that were once clearly understood to be either, that is morally right or that is morally wrong are now questionable. Why? Because they became politicized. And so now it's not so much about right and wrong as much as it's a matter of power. And if you remember last time I guess in our last episode, we dropped off with a quote here from Representative Heather Scott, talking about what a difficult week it had been for folks on the left in Idaho, Democrats and some little R Republicans, livid that they could no longer hurt children now that conservatives in Idaho successfully banned the murder of preborn children except in extraordinary circumstances, banned genital mutilation and irreversible hormone treatment of children, also removed adult material from the children's section of the library. And she wasn't wrong. That really upset some people. And who better to weigh in on how wrong everybody else is and how right he is than our good friend Jim Jones, former Attorney General. Look at this title to his commentary. The morality police won in this chapter, but that's not the end of the book. Jim, there's another book I know of that has kind of an interesting end with a twist. I don't know if you'd want to take a look at it, though, because what you're backing is clearly not on the winning side. But let's take a look at what Jim has to say about the morality police. This is specifically relating to the idea of keeping salacious material, and I'm talking cartoon books, whatever it is, teaching kids about how to perform various sex acts, how to pleasure themselves, how to examine their sexuality, basically dragging into that whole hypersexualized gender confusion, and then encouraging them to pursue it. That's material that is above kids' heads and needs to be off limits. And sadly, we've had people who have gone to their own public libraries or their school libraries here in Idaho and been able to access that. Now, Jim lies outright in here when he says, well, it's not even happening. I mean, why else when Senator Treacle was trying to read an excerpt from one of those books, checked out from a public library, available in the children's section, he got about one sentence in, and I believe it was Lieutenant Governor Bedke said, nope, don't do that. You can't read that. That is too harsh to be reading here in the legislature. Really? But we're okay with letting kids have it. So here's Jim's spin. He says, the great majority of Idahoans trust Gem State librarians. Oops, there's a little rhetorical sleight of hand. This was never about librarians in the first place. This is about what kind of material is appropriate to be available to kids. Plain and simple. I don't think every librarian in the state is out there secretly perving out trying to get salacious material to kids. But here's Jim trying to shift the focus. Okay, the deflection didn't work. Then he goes on. Despite any evidence that they have violated that trust, again, I would refer you to Senator Treacle's experience in a Senate hearing. Religious zealots in the legislature were finally successful this year in getting legislation passed to second guess them. No, what they did was they established boundaries. Now, Jim says, so much for keeping government decision-making closest to the people. Now, keep in mind, that library measure had to go back and forth a number of times before it was finally deemed, okay, this is not too overreaching and it's not too wimpy with no teeth. They still probably could have improved it, but they came to the best compromise they could. The bottom line being not to punish librarians, but to make sure that kids are not being inadvertently exposed to things that they shouldn't be, keeping the boundaries in place. Jim asks, why trust locally elected school and library boards to reflect community values when we can turn to the morality champions, Representatives Mike Moyle and Jaron Crane, to make those decisions? Well, nobody would have to make that kind of decision if this material wasn't available in libraries in the first place. But again, Jim is a lawyer. Jim is trained in the art of using words for deception or to wring as much meaning as possible by revealing as little truth as possible. And he's darn good at it. Now, he goes on to say those exalted legislators had the guiding hand of Christian nationalist that's supposed to lead us in the direction of a white supremacist, Blaine Conzatti, and his morality police at the Idaho Family Policy Center to lay the groundwork. Jim says, based on his mistaken belief that public libraries were dishing out smut to kids, is that what he said? Or is it simply that this material was available to children in the children's section, and that was the problem? Methinks Jim needs to maybe attend a truth-telling contest or two. Conzatti launched his crusade against books with any sexual content that ran afoul of his religious views. Yeah, but particularly the books that actually show pictures of people performing various sex acts and encouraging children to do the same. Is there a normal person within earshot who wouldn't at least have some hesitation about saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. That's good for the kids. He as much as admitted, which is lawyer talk for, I can twist his words into making it sound like he admitted that HB 710 was primarily intended to intimidate librarians into self-censoring books that he deemed impure. Look, it doesn't take much to recognize if a book is teaching kids about various masturbation techniques or whatever, depending on the age of those kids, it may not be appropriate. Again, how is this, we have to refer back to Blaine Conzatti and make sure that he approves of it. Nope. He just happened to be one of the people courageous enough to challenge the position of those who say that there's nothing wrong with this, when there clearly is. He crowed that the $250 bounty plus attorney's costs and fees for refusing to move targeted books would drive up liability insurance costs for library. Look, no law is a law without having some kind of a penalty attached. Otherwise, they would just be suggestions. So I don't know why Jim has this stuck in his craw. Librarians have been fretting over the cost of trying to fend off the frivolous purge demands that we all know are coming. Okay, here's another rhetorical technique. We all know this. Do we, Jim? I don't think anybody's asked everyone to know that we all know this. You're assuming that people know this, but maybe it's not such common sense as what you're talking about. So here is his remedy to the situation. He says anyone who can should vote for what he calls reasonable, civil, and pragmatic Republicans in our GOP primary election on May 21st. What he means is people who won't let their morals or let their sense of right and wrong get in the way of keeping the people he approves of in power. And replace the culture warriors who have made our libraries dangerous conflict zones. How is it a dangerous conflict zone to say, that's not appropriate, as opposed to kids? Take a look at this. What do you think? Should we go a little bit further? You want to come down the rabbit hole with me? I know which one I would consider much more dangerous and which one should actually land people in jail. He also says additional culture war extremists, or rather he encourages unaffiliated voters to register to vote in the Republican primary, especially if they're not Republican. That's kind of a little breach of trust there. Can you pretend to be one? Additional culture war extremists can be voted out in the November general election. And again, Jim wants to rewrite the book on right and wrong. There's a great book on this. It's been around for a long, long time. Many Americans still believe it, still hold to the Old and New Testaments. And that book has a very decided ending about what happens with the truly evil influences and truly evil things in this world. I'll give you a spoiler alert. They don't survive. They aren't around. They're cleansed. Not by man, not by political law, but by the Almighty, who actually sets the rules of what is right and wrong. And Jim is trying to throw this and apparently throw caution to the wind. So what does that look like in terms of, why is Idaho suddenly this battleground state where all these strange cultural things are taking place? Check out this tweet from Theo Wald. One of the left's asymmetrical advantages is their control of the national media. And they use the media to marshal resources for certain electoral projects like flipping small, meaning less populated red states. Idaho is their latest target, and without national conservative money to respond, they will succeed. And we actually have a couple of examples of what that looks like. This is from 2022, a New York Times headline, "A fracture in the Idaho's GOP as the far right seeks control." That's the New York Times. Concerned about what's going on in Idaho. Ahead of a primary vote, traditional Republicans are raising alarm about the future of the party, warning about, where have we heard this before? The growing strength of militia members, racists, and the John Birch Society. They might as well have just said people who still know the difference between right and wrong. Now, yes, you might find some people out there who are legit militia members. By the way, most of the ones I've met are actually very decent, down-to-earth people, not the toothless, mumbling hillbilly that Jim and his company would have us believe. As far as racists, well, we have some really wonderful hoaxes because apparently the supply of racism is not meeting the demand for it by those people who like to use it as a kind of cudgel to beat people into political submission. And as far as the John Birch Society, I'm not a member, but I'll tell you, I've learned a lot of things through their material. And frankly, they're probably one of the better documented, more factual organizations out there, more so than our popular press. Here's another one from the Washington Post. Christian patriots are flocking from blue states to Idaho. North Idaho offers a window into what a right-wing vision for Christian America can look like and the power it can wield in state politics. Fearful, scary stuff. How dare they come in there? And then this one is actually more recent. This is actually from KTVB just this last week. Agenbrod and Lenny to face off again in Senate race. Now, this was originally published, I believe, in the Idaho Press. But look, the little subheadline, oh man, Channel 7 couldn't help themselves. They just had to put some spin in there to make sure that you dummies who are looking at this understand that Lenny is a member of the ultra-conservative Freedom Caucus. And Agenbrod had been more of an establishment Republican. Well, that practically sounds like a respectable thing. He probably drinks his tea with his pinky extended before he was unseated. Now, they don't bother to ask why was he unseated, and it could be because people were tired of establishment Republican politics, which it turns out is a lot like Democrat establishment politics in most other states. By the way, Brian Lenny is a champion of conservative values as well as proper government. So it'll be very interesting to watch that race. But isn't that neat? You have to be warned, he's ultra-conservative. What does that even mean? That's a good way, by the way, to if you find yourself in the so-called rhetorical quicksand, ask somebody, what exactly do you mean by that? Let's get a definition on the table so we're sure that we're talking about the same thing. Now, abortion has been another really hot issue. As Heather Scott pointed out, whoa, there is some anger here. And so out of Colorado, look at this. We did a historic thing, 230,000 signatures to get abortion to qualify for the November ballot. Abortion rights are a Colorado value. And we will prove that again this November. Well, people in Idaho apparently were paying attention. And so now we have seen some action here. Before we go there, though, Jesse Kelly says, look, we're being told this morning. Here's Governor Kathy Hochul of New York. My message to the anti-choice extremists is clear. Don't underestimate the rage of women in this country. To which Jesse responds, yes, single women on anti-anxiety meds will burn down Western civilization for the right to murder their unborn children so they can go get drunk on spring break. We know. That's what we're up against. And here it comes to Idaho. Oh boy. It starts with stories like this from KTVB, which this is actually a national story talking about an incident that allegedly happened in Texas. Emergency rooms refused to treat pregnant women, leaving one to miscarry in a lobby restroom. And then the subheadline, let's tie it into Idaho. Well, the Biden administration has sued Idaho over its abortion ban, even in medical emergencies, arguing it conflicts with the federal law. So here we go with Idaho's own version of we're going to take it back. Group launches effort to explore ballot initiative, restoring abortion access in Idaho. Organizers say fundraising begins now for inclusion on the 2026 ballot. They don't like to call it abortion. They say reproductive rights and reproductive services. But I want you to notice Kelsey Mosley Morris is she's a reporter, and this is pretty much all she reports on. If you could say she's an ideologue, it's definitely on the abortion issue. Is she going to give us a fair recounting of what's going on? Well, let's look at how she handles comments when she posts other articles. She had talked about a press call this morning with St. Luke's chief medical officer, Dr. Jim Souza, saying for all of last year, only one patient was airlifted to another state for maternal complications. Since January, when the Supreme Court lifted the protection from the abortion ban, this has happened 6 times. What she's trying to make the case for is Idaho is on the road to 20 or more incidents like this. Now, it's not telling the whole story, but look at this. Someone calls her out and says, hey, you're limiting comments. Wow, a reporter that limits comments. I wonder what these medical conditions are. They never mention them because it's a lie. And to this, Kelsey Mosley Morris comes back with, yep, I'm going to limit comments on posts like this for my own self-care as someone who is 21 weeks pregnant. Thanks for understanding. See, she's a victim, and also she is above being questioned. This is how the press looks at you. I'm not telling you, you don't hate the press enough. Some people will tell you that. I'm not going to tell you that. But I will tell you, you don't understand how much contempt the press has for you. When they are to be listened to and they are to be thoughtfully contemplated and obeyed, and no one is to question, especially in the public square. Now, I want to contrast that with another reporter who I think does a marvelous job of getting information out there, particularly about political goings-on in Idaho. That would be Brian Allman from the Gem State Chronicle. He published this a couple of days ago, a call for interviews, and he's putting this out to the candidates. I want to talk to everyone, agree or disagree. In fact, here's how he puts it. Brian says, my goal for this project is to have conversations. There are sitting legislators and candidates I have criticized in the past, but I hope that doesn't stop them from being willing to discuss the issues with me. I do not intend for these interviews to be confrontational or combative. I will likely ask tough questions about issues, votes, and statements, but most of all, I want to get to know the people who could potentially represent us in the legislature. Now, I hope you don't get to feel like I'm, trying to just use this as an opportunity to go on and on about how great Brian is, but he is a fantastic reporter. He gets good, credible information out there at a better rate and in greater quantities than almost anybody I know. But I will add this, on top of that, he is a decent human being and always seems to take a much more thoughtful, well-rounded approach to the information that he presents. I can't say that about much of Idaho's legacy media, which I think would follow Kelsey Mosley Morris's, example of, well, you can't question me. I'll just turn off the comments and you will believe every word that I say. The matter is done. It's right there on the internet. The matter is settled. Yeah. It used to be that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and now I'm beginning to believe it's hell hath no fury like a lawyer of a woman scorned, or a political pack of women scorned, or just women who, for some reason, think abortion is the greatest expression of humanity and personal freedom that they know of. But it doesn't change the fundamental fact. It is still a question that is based in right and wrong. If an innocent life is being destroyed, we should have a pretty fair answer to that question, even if there are sometimes extenuating circumstances. And rarely is it rape or incest or the life of the mother. It is more often, I got pregnant on spring break and I don't want to have to deal with this. That's a terrible excuse for terminating an innocent life. But again, we're supposed to believe that right and wrong really no longer exist. There's only what's political. And when it determines what's right and wrong, well, that's when you get some of the worst of what humanity is capable of doing to one another. A little something to think about. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.